Hey guys, this is Colin with Colin Talks Crypto, and I just wanted to drop you a real quick video and show you something very interesting, very obvious that I realized. This is the S&P 500, and what is being shown here is the 200-day moving average. That's this teal colored line. Now, what do you notice on first glance? The only time the stock market dropped significantly below the 200-day moving average was during the 2000 dot-com bubble and that crash, the 2008 financial crash, COVID briefly, and we haven't really even gone there. This is just another clue to me that we have a long ways to go before we're done. Now, it's not to say that we're not going to rally, we're not going to double top or make new all-time highs, but to think that we are not going to see one of these massive crashes, to me, is just utterly insane when we look at the things I've covered in my previous videos, like the yield curve inversion, which is the most inverted in the past 40 years, as well as the federal funds rate being raised over 5%. These are patterns that have predicted recessions, and yet we haven't really seen much of a recession. So either A, the recession's canceled, or B, we have a long ways to go down to approximate past events like 2000 and 2008. Now let's take a look back a little further. Where's the next major crash below that 200-day moving average? There's a couple little short dips. We're not going to worry about that too much. Right here in the 1970s, between 1974 and 1975 was a massive crash, dropping significantly below the 200-day moving average. But you can see there's not a whole lot of times where this has happened. It's really a fairly rare occurrence. And we haven't really seen much of one really since the 70s, since the late 70s, all the way until 2000 when we had the dot-com crash, and then 2008. So the real question here is not if we're going to see it drop below the 200-day moving average ever again. It's more like when. When is that going to occur? And I encourage you to watch my recent video on how I think this is going to play out, all the corroborating metrics that back this up, and my case for the biggest stock market crash that we have seen in many decades. I encourage you to watch that video so that you can see why I say that and not just me saying it for no reason. There's a lot of thought put into that video and a lot of good evidence pointing to that as a possibility, as a distinct possibility, and I would argue a likelihood. And as you can see on this chart, I've actually got it marked the two support zones in red that I think are the most likely to be the bottom of the upcoming crash. And I've actually highlighted in purple sort of the timeline that I'm looking at between approximately May 2025 and May 2027 as the most likely date that the bottom could form. And then vertically, you can see the range that I'm looking at for where it could drop down to. So who knows? Maybe we see it go up to here. Maybe we see S&P 500 break 5,000. I wouldn't be surprised. But I also wouldn't be surprised to see this. And again, watch that last video if you don't know why I'm saying that. And I know that this is a cryptocurrency channel, and I talk a lot about the stock market and the upcoming crash. And so just to be very clear, the reason I don't spend a lot of time talking about Bitcoin or Ethereum or any of these other cryptocurrencies is because I do feel that they will be extremely correlated, at least in the near term, to any effects related to a crash in the legacy economy. So maybe that will answer your question on what I think will happen. You know, it all depends on how high Bitcoin climbs, for example, though. If Bitcoin reaches $120,000 because of the ETF hype and FOMO, which is not out of the realm of possibility, then the crash, even if it's the most severe crash we've seen in a long time, dropping from $120,000 might only take us down to $20,000 or $40,000 at the bottom. Versus if we only get to $50,000 for this kind of local peak in the next 10 months or so for Bitcoin, then we may drop from $50,000 down to $12,000. Like that becomes more likely of a situation if we're expecting the economy to collapse to such great extent. And a very common question I get, just to answer this as well, is What about the halving event? That's a very common question. Well, what about the halving event? First of all, most of Bitcoin's supply has been issued. There's very little left to issue. So the supply shock is not as great. It's not to say it will have no effect. I think it will have some effect, but I don't think it's going to be as big as most people expect. And I would probably phrase it like this. The effects of a cataclysmic stock market collapse, dropping approximately 50%, let's say, would far outweigh any of the positive effects of a Bitcoin halving event. So yeah, you might get a little bump up in price or a medium bump up in price, but I don't think it's enough to override the economic crash that I see coming. Now, I want to be clear that I do see Bitcoin as absolutely having a future and reaching $1 million someday. I'm not a Bitcoin bear. I'm not a crypto bear, but the economy is not looking so hot. And I do think it's important to factor that in. I think it's important to look at that and the implications that could have. The only way Bitcoin would not collapse with the economy is if it decouples. And I don't see that happening. Some people say, well, that's what Bitcoin was designed for. My response would be, it doesn't matter what Bitcoin was designed for. The market decides how it's valued, not the original creators. So let's see what happens. I think that Bitcoin and especially altcoins are going to be negatively affected by this crash that I'm referring to. And so I'm looking at it as a buy the crash opportunity, not even just a buy the dip, a buy the generational crash opportunity. And the gains that can be made after this, I think, are going to be utterly life-changing because Bitcoin is going to recover and Bitcoin is going to climb to 7 figures someday. And part of that will be dollar devaluation, and part of that will be Bitcoin just accruing purchasing power. I very much believe this. So I'm still a crypto bull, but that's on the long term. But it depends on what time frame you're asking me. I don't have a fixed answer either way. Okay, guys, I hope this elucidates some of the questions you may be having. Stay tuned for more. Have a great day.